The Finals has mastered something that many other games just haven't been able to do. It has made a shooter that actually has some great melee options. If you've been playing The Finals, you know to not underestimate someone running something like the sledgehammer, spear, or the sword. There are actually a lot of people who main melee weapons in the shooter FPS, and I don't think that's by accident. I'm here today to argue that there has been a lot of thought put into melee weapons by Embark Studios to make them as good as they are in the Finals. There's a lot of aspects of each class that are great for not only guns but melee options as well. These are the specializations, gadgets, and weapons themselves, and each class has their own way of helping out their melee weapons. But first, let's talk about the most important aspect a melee weapon build needs in order to be good in an FPS: closing the gap. I think it's pretty obvious that if you're running a melee weapon and your enemy has a gun, they can just shoot you before you deal any damage. That is why you need the ability to get closer to them by either rapidly moving towards them, making them rapidly move towards you, using cover, or by simply sneaking up on them. Now each class in the Finals handles this a bit differently, so we're going to go over each class individually, starting with the Light class. Light has two melee options, the sword and the dagger. They each seem kinda similar but play differently from one another. Both have a basic melee attack and a charge melee attack. The charge melee attacks do a lot more damage, along with providing a bit of a dash on the sword that might close up a few feet between you and the enemy. If you do a charge attack with a dagger from behind, it does even more damage, which is not something that is important for this video in particular, but I just thought it was something that I should point out so people don't yell at me in the comments for forgetting that. The sword and the dagger alone, without the class's specializations and gadgets, would not be great in the Finals. Every specialization in the Light class all work to help close the gap with the enemy. You can use grapple and evasive dash to rapidly move towards the enemy, and you can use the cloaking device to go invis and sneak up on the enemy. You can build up your charge attack and then dash, grapple, or go invis without losing that charge, which is some really good synergy with the class melee. And let's also talk about one of the best gadgets on Light, the stun gun. Stun gun is really good for melees in particular, because it freezes the enemy in place, meaning that they can't just run away from you. One of the first builds I ever learned about back in the beta was the sword build with cloaking device and stun gun. The strat is pretty simple. Just run up to somebody while invis, stun them, and then sword them. Now granted, the stun gun and invis have been nerfed since the beta, but it's still a really good build to use, and it's a great example of how melee is helped by the classes, gadgets, and specializations. We're going to skip the medium for now and move right on to the heavy. You'll understand why when we get to medium. But the heavy is very similar to the light. The charge and slam moves you rapidly towards the enemy, just like the dash and the grapple. The goo gun acts as a sort of stun gun if you play it right. Where the heavy goes in a somewhat different direction with its melee playstyle is the mesh shield, and other offensive devices like the dome shield and barricade. These are all used to provide cover from enemy fire, and the mesh shield in particular, you can aggressively push the enemy, making them either retreat or try to push themselves. Honestly, I would recommend using charge and slam, and also the winch claw, which can bring the enemy to you. Both of these specializations can help you close the gap pretty easily. Let's not also forget about the RPG. Even after multiple nerfs, it's still the best option for a melee gadget on heavy. It basically acts as a stun gun for the heavy when you don't have one, making so that you don't have to completely close the gap during an engagement. Now let's talk about the melee weapons on heavy, the sledgehammer and the spear. The sledgehammer can do a light attack and a heavy attack. The heavy attack can instantly destroy the destructible environments that the Finals is known for, along with dealing a lot of damage. The spear also has a light attack and a heavy attack, but its heavy attack does a series of spin attacks, doing some great AoE damage. I personally prefer the sledgehammer, but both weapons work really well with what the heavy has to offer. Now finally, the medium. I saved this one for last because it's the most unique in how it deals with closing the gap. It seems like the specializations and some of the gadgets on light and heavy were made with melee weapons in mind. You can still use these abilities with guns, I'm not here to argue against that, but I want to bring that up to talk about how none of the specializations on medium are particularly good at closing the gap. The healing beam is only good for your teammates. The dematerializer can be used to chase people or evade fire, but that's not really what it's used for. I think the best specialization for medium melee would be the turret, which doesn't intrinsically help with melees, but does provide some cover fire and extra HP. Not really any gadgets help out in closing the gap either. Sure, you got the jump pad and the zip line, which are great for movement in general, but not really the best for melee combat. I think that Embark was aware of this when making the Ride Shield and then later the Dual Blades. Both of these weapons have a block mechanic instead of a heavy attack, The Riot Shield can block the fire that hits the shield, and the dual blades can reflect half the bullets shot from the enemy back at the enemy. Both of these mechanics are really good at closing the gap with the enemy because you can push with the Riot Shield, and the dual blades will make the enemy think twice before shooting at you. I predict that if a new medium melee weapon comes out, it will have a mechanic similar to the 2 medium melee weapons that we already have. Or Embark will add a new specialization to the medium, which will help aid in closing the gap. I'm recording this before really any Season 5 information has come out, at least to my knowledge. So far I've seen a teaser image that looks like we're going to have maybe an Aztec themed season, and possibly get a new shotgun, but I can't say for certain whether a new melee weapon is coming out with Season 5. But what do you think? Do you think melee weapons in the finals are good? Do you hate them? Are you somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments section down below. If you want to help support the channel, subscribing is the best way to do so. Thank you all for watching. See you later.